The first thing he said to me wasn't hello, it was, "Please, Mom, dress appropriately." He said it quietly, like a favor. Like he was protecting me from myself. And in that moment, standing in my bedroom with the afternoon light slanting across the dresser, I felt something old and familiar settle into my chest. Not anger. Not yet. Just that slow, aching understanding that comes when love turns conditional. I stood there holding the dress I'd planned to wear, a soft blue, modest, pressed the night before, while my son's voice echoed in my head. Appropriately. As if I'd ever shown up to anything in my life unprepared. As if the woman who ironed his school shirts before dawn needed lessons in decorum. The house smelled like starch and lemon cleaner. I'd been tidying since morning, the way I always do before a family event, even when it isn't at my place. Habits cling to you after 40 years of raising people. You prepare anyway. You show up anyway. Downstairs, I could hear the hum of voices through my phone speaker, my daughter-in-law coordinating last-minute details, my sister asking about parking, someone laughing too loudly. It was supposed to be a celebration. A milestone birthday for my son. A rented hall. Extended family. Old friends. A chance, I thought, to feel like we still belonged to one another. I folded the blue dress and laid it back on the bed. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I've learned over time that shock doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives like politeness, smiling, nodding, pretending you understand the rules have changed while no one bothered to tell you when. Before all this, my life was quiet in a good way. I'm a morning person. Always have been. I wake before the sun, boil water for tea, stand at the kitchen window, and watch the street come alive. The same couple walks their dog at 6:30 sharp. The bakery truck rattles past at 7. There's comfort in repetition. There's dignity in knowing what comes next. After my husband passed, the quiet got louder for a while. Grief does that, it amplifies every empty space. But time, stubborn and kind, softened the edges. I learned how to be alone without being lonely. I volunteered at the library. I cooked meals that took all afternoon. I kept my garden neat. Tomatoes in summer. Basil that refused to die. My son used to call every Sunday. Sometimes he still does, though less regularly now. Life gets busy, he says. Work. Marriage. Responsibilities. I nod and tell him I understand, because I do. Or at least, I thought I did. His wife, my daughter-in-law, was never unkind to me outright. That's the part people don't understand when I try to explain. She wasn't cruel. She was precise. Every smile measured. Every compliment edged with correction. She'd adjust my place setting at dinner without a word. She'd say things like, "We're keeping it very modern," or "We're trying something different," as if the past were a stain that needed bleaching. I told myself it was generational. I told myself I was being sensitive. I told myself that love meant making room. And for a long time I did. The first clue that something had shifted came months before the party. We were at their house for dinner, my son's idea, he said. He wanted to bring everyone together. The table was beautiful, I'll give her that. Linen napkins, candles, food plated like a magazine spread. I wore a simple cardigan and slacks, nothing loud, nothing old-fashioned. Halfway through the meal, she mentioned the upcoming event. The venue, the guest list, the theme. Formal casual, she said, smiling at everyone except me. But polished. We wanted to feel elevated. I laughed lightly. Sounds lovely. She tilted her head. Just modern, you know? I knew. Or I thought I did. Later, in the kitchen, my son followed me as I rinsed plates. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, eyes not quite meeting mine. "Mom," he said, gently. "She just wants everything to look cohesive." Cohesive. Another word that felt like a closed door. I asked him what that meant for me. He hesitated, then shrugged. Nothing. Just maybe no loud prints. No, you know. I didn't know. But I nodded anyway. That night, I went home and stood in front of my closet longer than usual. I touched fabrics like they were old friends. Dresses I'd worn to graduations. Blouses I'd bought with my own money after years of stretching his father's paycheck. Clothes that held memories. I told myself it didn't matter. It was just an outfit. The week of the party, the calls increased. Instructions, reminders, suggestions disguised as concern. And then, the morning of the event, the message came. Please dress appropriately. No emoji. No explanation. Just that. I sat on the edge of my bed and read it twice. Then a third time. The clock ticked. The kettle cooled. In that quiet, something inside me finally settled, not into anger, but into clarity. I realized then that this wasn't about clothes. It was about control. About optics. About deciding who belonged on the stage and who should fade into the background. I thought of all the years I'd dressed my son for picture day. The times I'd stood in the back of auditoriums so he could shine. The pride I'd swallowed so he could grow. I opened my closet again. This time, I didn't reach for the blue dress. I reached for the truth. And as I did, I felt calm for the first time in weeks. The dress I chose wasn't loud. It wasn't scandalous. It didn't break any rules, at least, not the kind you can write down. It was a deep, honest red. The kind that doesn't beg for attention but refuses to apologize for being seen. I hadn't worn it in years. Not because it didn't fit, but because I'd stopped believing I was allowed to take up that much space. I'd bought it after my husband died, on a day when grief sat so heavy on my shoulders that I needed something solid to push back against it. I remembered standing in the mirror then, surprised at myself. Still here, the dress seemed to say. Still standing. I pressed it carefully, the iron hissing like it was letting off steam for both of us. I pinned my hair the way I always had, neat, soft at the temples. I chose pearls, not diamonds. There's a difference. One announces. The other endures. As I dressed, my phone buzzed again. A reminder about parking. A note about seating. Nothing about the earlier message. That silence spoke louder than anything else. When I stepped outside, the air had that late afternoon warmth that promises evening will be kind. I locked the door, checked it twice, and paused on the porch. For a moment, I wondered if I was being foolish. If I was inviting trouble where none needed to exist. Then I remembered the word appropriately, how it had landed like a verdict, and I squared my shoulders. The drive to the venue felt longer than usual. Traffic lights stretched. Radios talked too much. I turned the volume down and let my thoughts do the talking. I wasn't rehearsing a confrontation. I wasn't planning a scene. I was simply arriving as myself, without editing. The hall was already buzzing when I walked in. Music drifted from speakers. Laughter bounced off the walls. The smell of catered food, rosemary chicken, something sweet and buttery, hung in the air. I saw my son across the room first. He was laughing with an old college friend, drink in hand, shoulders relaxed. For a second, my heart softened. That's my boy, I thought. No matter what, that's my boy. Then his eyes met mine. The smile froze. Not disappeared, just paused, like a video buffering. His gaze flicked to my dress, then back to my face. In that split second, I saw it all. Surprise, calculation, something close to panic. He excused himself and crossed the room quickly, too quickly. His wife followed a few steps behind, heels clicking sharp against the floor. "Mom," he said, voice low. "Can we talk?" Right there, under the soft lights, with guests milling around and a photographer. Adjusting a lens, he wanted to pull me aside. To manage me. To contain whatever he thought I was about to disrupt. I smiled at him. Not sweetly. Just steadily. "Of course," I said. "But it can wait." His wife reached us then. She looked me up and down, not openly, she was too practiced for that, but with the kind of glance that measures and files away. "That's quite a color," she said lightly. "It's honest," I replied, before I could stop myself. She blinked, just once. My son cleared his throat. "We were hoping for something a bit more subdued," he said. There it was. Not unkind. Not loud. Just firm enough to let me know the line had been crossed. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. "You asked me to dress appropriately," I said. "I did." He looked around, aware of eyes, ears, the thin walls of public spaces. "Mom, please. Today's not the day." I nodded. "You're right," I said. "Today's not the day for pretending." I turned then, not dramatically, not storming off, and walked further into the room. I greeted relatives. I hugged old friends. I accepted compliments with a thank you and a straight back. A few people looked between us, sensing something they couldn't name. The program began. Speeches. Toasts. Stories that smoothed over edges and painted the past in agreeable colors. When my son took the microphone, he thanked everyone, his wife, his friends, his mentors. He paused, glanced at me, then moved on. I didn't mind. Or at least, I told myself I didn't. Then, unexpectedly, the MC called my name. "We'd love to hear from Mom," he said, smiling. After all, none of us would be here without her. A ripple of applause followed. My son stiffened. His wife's smile tightened, just a fraction. I stood. The microphone was warm in my hand. The lights felt brighter from the stage, washing faces into a blur of expectation. I could hear my own breath. Slow. Steady. I didn't plan to speak, I began. But I suppose motherhood teaches you to be ready, even when you're not. A soft laugh moved through the room. I've watched my son grow from a boy who needed his shoes tied into a man who ties his own life together, I continued. And like all mothers, I've learned when to step back, when to let go. I paused. I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. But I've also learned, I said, that respect isn't something you outgrow. It isn't replaced by appearances or managed for convenience. It's something you carry with you or without you. The room was quiet now. Not uncomfortable. Attentive. I dressed appropriately today, I finished. I dressed as the woman who raised him. The woman who taught him to stand tall. And the woman who knows her place right here. I handed the microphone back and returned to my seat. Applause followed. Polite at first. Then fuller. Warmer. I didn't look at my son until later. When I did, he was staring at the floor. The applause faded, but the quiet that followed stayed with me. I sat there with my hands folded in my lap, the way I used to sit in church when my husband was alive still, composed, listening for something deeper than noise. Around me, conversations restarted in careful fragments. Someone clinked a glass. Someone laughed a second too late. Across the room, my son hadn't moved. His wife leaned in and whispered something I couldn't hear. He nodded once, sharply, and took a drink he didn't seem to taste. For the first time that evening, I felt the full weight of what had happened, not the speech, not the dress, but the fracture that had finally shown itself. I stayed through the rest of the program. I didn't rush out. I didn't seek him out either. Dignity, I've learned, sometimes means knowing when not to chase. When the cake was cut and the photographer called for family pictures, I rose with everyone else. We stood shoulder to shoulder, smiles practiced, hands placed where they were told. The flash went off again and again, freezing us into versions of ourselves that would be shared and framed and remembered incorrectly. After the last photo, my son caught my arm. "Mom," he said, "we need to talk." There was a time when those words would have made my heart race. Now, they landed softly. I nodded. We stepped outside the hall into the cooler evening air. The city hummed around us, cars passing, a siren far off, the ordinary world continuing as if nothing had shifted. "What was that?" he asked, voice tight. Not angry. Afraid. I spoke, I said. I showed up. "You embarrassed us," he said, finally meeting my eyes. The words sat between us, heavy and round. Us. Not him. Not me. A unit I no longer belonged to. I studied his face, the familiar line of his jaw, the crease between his brows I used to smooth with my thumb when he was little. "Was that your fear?" I asked gently, "or someone else's?" He looked away. "That dress," he said. "That speech. You made it about you." I felt the sting then, sharp and clean. "I've spent my life making it about you," I replied. "Tonight, I reminded everyone where you came from." "That's not what this was supposed to be," he said. "We had an image." There it was again. The word he hadn't said before, but had been circling all night. "An image," I repeated. "Yes," he said, exhaling. "We needed everything to look a certain way. And I didn't fit," I said. He didn't answer. The silence told me what I needed to know. I realized then that the message that morning hadn't been spontaneous. It hadn't been protective. It had been planned. A final adjustment. A way to ensure I stayed within the margins they'd drawn. I wasn't trying to hurt you, he said, softer now. I didn't want a scene. I smiled sadly. You tried to prevent one by making me smaller, I said. That's not protection. That's erasure. Behind us, laughter spilled from the open doors. Life went on. Inside, his wife was thanking guests, her posture perfect, her smile unwavering. She thinks you judge her, he said suddenly. I raised an eyebrow. Do you? He hesitated. Sometimes. There it was, the real betrayal. Not the dress. Not the words. The quiet acceptance of a story about me that I hadn't written. I've welcomed her, I said. I've stepped back when asked. I've bitten my tongue more times than I can count. If she still feels judged, perhaps it's because she knows what she's doing. He flinched at that. That's not fair, he said. Neither was that message, I replied. We stood there, the space between us filled with years of unspoken compromises. I thought of every holiday I'd adjusted, every opinion I'd swallowed, every time I'd been told, kindly, politely, to make room. I didn't come tonight to fight, I said. I came to celebrate you. And yet, he said. And yet, I agreed. Here we are. He ran a hand through his hair, the way he does when he's overwhelmed. Can we just move past this? He asked. For tonight. I considered it. Then I shook my head. I won't make myself small so things can stay comfortable, I said. Not anymore. His shoulders sagged. What do you want from me? The question surprised me with its honesty. I want respect, I said simply. Not because I'm your mother, but because I'm a person. We went back inside without another word. I said my goodbyes politely. I hugged cousins. I thanked the hosts. When I reached his wife, she kissed my cheek lightly, her perfume sharp and floral. Lovely speech, she said. Truth has a way of finding its moment, I replied. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. On the drive home, the city lights blurred through my windshield. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. I felt something steadier than either, resolve. At home, I hung the red dress carefully back in the closet. I made tea. I sat at the kitchen table and listened to the clock tick. The next morning, my phone buzzed. A message from my son. We need to set some boundaries. I stared at the screen for a long moment before typing back. So do I. That was the beginning, not of the end, but of the reckoning. The word boundaries sat with me all day. It followed me through the grocery store, through the quiet aisles of the library where I returned a book I hadn't finished, through the garden where my tomatoes were just beginning to turn red. People talk about boundaries like they're fences you build to keep others out. But I've learned they're just as much about knowing where you end. I didn't reply to my son right away. That alone was new. In the past, I would have rushed to reassure him, to smooth things over, to apologize for emotions I hadn't intended to cause. But that morning, as I watered the basil and felt the sun warm my shoulders, I let the message sit unanswered. By evening, another text came through. Shorter this time. She's really upset. I closed my eyes and breathed. Upset. Not reflective. Not apologetic. Upset. I typed back slowly. I imagine I am too. There was no response after that. Days passed. Then a week. The silence stretched, not loud, not dramatic, just empty. I filled it with ordinary things. Laundry. Phone calls with my sister. Long walks where I let my thoughts wander without forcing them into conclusions. It was during one of those walks that I ran into Margaret. She lives 3 blocks over and has known me since my son was in diapers. She'd been at the party. She took my hand the moment she saw me. I wanted to tell you, she said, squeezing gently, I was proud of you. I smiled. Thank you. They needed to hear it, she added. All of them. Her words settled something in me. Not validation, I didn't need that anymore, but confirmation that what I'd done hadn't been imagined or exaggerated. It had been seen. The following Sunday, my son called. His voice sounded tired. Can I come by? He asked. Yes, I said. I'll make tea. He arrived in the late afternoon, empty-handed, shoulders tense. He looked around my living room like it was unfamiliar territory, even though it held every version of him, school photos, Old trophies, the dent in the wall from when he threw a ball too hard indoors. We sat at the table. I poured tea. Neither of us spoke at first. She feels like you undermined us, he said eventually. By being honest? I asked. By being public, he corrected. I stirred my tea. You made it public when you tried to manage me in front of everyone, I said. I simply refused to disappear. He rubbed his face. You don't understand how much pressure she's under. I looked at him then, really looked. I do, I said. But I won't carry it for her. He frowned. She thinks you don't respect her. And I think she doesn't respect me, I replied. Those two things can't coexist without someone being diminished. He was quiet for a long moment. The clock ticked. The kettle cooled. She wants you to apologize, he said finally. I felt the familiar pull, the old instinct to bend. It rose in me like muscle memory. Then it passed. I'm willing to talk, I said. I'm willing to listen. But I won't apologize for standing in my truth. He looked up sharply. So that's it? That's my boundary, I said. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling. You've changed. I smiled softly. No, I said. I've stopped pretending. That was the moment something shifted. Not dramatically. Just enough. He didn't argue. He didn't agree either. But he nodded. I need time, he said. So do I replied. When he left, I felt lighter. Not relieved, lighter. Like I'd put down something heavy I'd been carrying without realizing it. Weeks went by. Holidays came and went in quieter forms. Invitations arrived later, phrased more carefully. I noticed a change in tone. Less instruction. More request. I wasn't included in everything. That hurt. I won't pretend it didn't. But the hurt was clean, not corrosive. It didn't eat at my sense of self. One afternoon, my daughter-in-law called. Her voice was clipped, formal. I think we should talk, she said. I agree, I replied. She came over 2 days later. She sat. Straight-backed at my table, hands folded. She didn't accept tea. I felt exposed at the party, she said. Like you challenged me in front of everyone. I didn't challenge you, I said. I corrected the story being told about me. She bristled. We were trying to build something. And I was trying not to be erased, I replied. We went back and forth like that for a while. Not shouting. Not crying. Just two women circling a truth neither had wanted to name. Finally, she said, I didn't realize how it sounded. That was the closest thing to an apology I was going to get. I believe you, I said. And I did. When she left, I sat alone for a long time. I didn't feel victorious. I felt settled. Some relationships don't end. They recalibrate. Others loosen their grip. Either way, you survive by staying whole. I still wear the red dress sometimes. Not often. Just when I need the reminder. Because dressing appropriately, I've learned, has nothing to do with blending in. It has everything to do with standing in the truth you've earned. After that conversation, things didn't magically become easy. People like to believe that once the truth is spoken, the air clears and everyone breathes better. But real families don't work like that. Truth doesn't erase history, it rearranges it. And rearranging takes time. The next family gathering was smaller. Intentional. A Sunday lunch at my son's house. No extended relatives. No friends. Just the four of us around a table that suddenly felt too wide. I arrived 10 minutes early, as I always do. Old habits don't vanish overnight. I brought a pie, nothing fancy, just apple, still warm, the crust imperfect. When my daughter-in-law opened the door, she smiled, but her eyes stayed cautious. Come in, she said. The house smelled like roasted vegetables and something citrusy. Clean. Controlled. I took off my shoes and followed her into the kitchen. My son was already there, sleeves rolled up, setting plates. He looked at me, then smiled. Hey. Real one this time. Tired, but real. Hi, Mom. Hi, I said. We moved around each other carefully, like dancers learning new steps. No one mentioned the party. No one mentioned the dress. We talked about weather. About traffic. About a neighbor's dog that barked too much. At the table, my daughter-in-law poured water for everyone. When she reached my glass, she hesitated, then filled it to the top. It was a small thing, but I noticed. Halfway through the meal, she asked me about my garden. Not politely. Not as filler. She asked which tomatoes were doing best. Whether Basil liked full sun or partial shade. I answered. Slowly. Honestly. My son watched us like someone witnessing a ceasefire. After lunch, when the plates were cleared, he excused himself to take a call. The two of us sat alone in the living room. I didn't mean to make you feel small, she said suddenly. I looked at her. Really looked this time. She was younger than I remembered. Or maybe I'd been seeing her through too much tension. I believe that, I said. But intention doesn't undo impact. She nodded. I'm used to managing things, she admitted. If everything looks right, I feel safe. I recognized that instinct. It wasn't so different from my own years ago. I raised a son, I said. Not a brand. She winced. Then she sighed. I know. We sat in silence after that, not awkward, not warm, just honest. When I left, my son walked me to the door. Thank you for coming, he said. Thank you for inviting me, I replied. That distinction mattered. Life didn't go back to what it was before. It couldn't. Something fundamental had shifted, not broken, just repositioned. My calls with my son became more thoughtful, less rushed, sometimes shorter, sometimes deeper. He asked my opinion again, not always, but enough to remind me I still existed beyond obligation. I stopped editing myself in conversations. When something didn't sit right, I named it calmly. Not to provoke, not to punish, just to exist fully. There were moments of discomfort. A birthday card that arrived late. A holiday photo where I stood slightly off-center. Old patterns don't disappear quietly. But neither did I. One afternoon, months later, I wore the red dress again. Not to an event. Just to the grocery store. Just because. A woman in the produce aisle smiled at me. That color suits you, she said. Thank you, I replied, feeling something warm settle in my chest. On my way out, my phone buzzed. A message from my son. We're hosting dinner next weekend. Dress however you like. I stared at the words longer than necessary. Then I smiled. What I learned from all this isn't that confrontation solves everything. It doesn't. What it does is clarify. It shows you who needs you to stay small so they can feel tall. And who, when forced to see you clearly, learns to stand beside you instead. I didn't set out to embarrass my son. I didn't plan a lesson. I simply refused to shrink. And sometimes, that's enough to change the room. I still love him. Deeply. Fiercely. That never changed. But now, that love includes me. When people ask me what it means to dress appropriately, I think of that morning in my bedroom. The folded blue dress. The red one waiting patiently behind it. Appropriate isn't about blending into someone else's comfort. It's about honoring the life you've lived. The years you've given. The truth you carry. As I sit here now, the house quiet except for the ticking clock and the hum of the refrigerator, I think about how many years I spent confusing love with silence. I thought being a good mother meant never making anyone uncomfortable. Never taking up too much space. Never letting my feelings wrinkle someone else's picture of a perfect family. I told myself that endurance was the same thing as strength. But it isn't. Strength is knowing when to stand still and when to stand up. That night, in that red dress, I didn't expose anyone. I didn't attack anyone. I simply stopped. Hiding. And in doing so, I learned something that took me a lifetime to understand. Respect that depends on your obedience isn't respect at all. Families don't fall apart because the truth is spoken. They fall apart when one person is expected to carry everyone else's comfort at the cost of their own dignity. My son is still my son. I still love him with the same fierce, bone-deep love I always have. But now, that love includes boundaries. It includes honesty. It includes the woman I am now, not just the mother I used to be. And if there's one thing I hope you take from my story, it's this. You don't owe anyone your silence just to keep the peace. You don't have to shrink to belong. And you are allowed, at any age, to show up as your whole self. So tell me, if someone you loved told you to dress appropriately, would you have chosen the blue dress? Or would you have worn the truth? If this story spoke to you, share it with someone who needs the reminder. And don't forget to subscribe and support, because stories like these deserve to be heard.